Hi everyone. Today I wanted to post a quick video to move us into this poetry section of the class. I know a lot of students from the past just say to me, I can't stand poetry. I don't like it. I'm intimidated by it. It's weird. It's confusing. So I just want to walk us through some things that might make this section of the course go a little better for you, because I know poetry is a different animal. It's much different than some of the things we've read so far. So let's get into this cure for the poetry blues. Our poetry problem, right? This is something that I've gathered from years of teaching. Why do we run away from poetry? Why do students just, like this little girl, just sprint away whenever they see a poem on the page or even hear the word poetry? First off, I think it's demanding, right? It's not like sitting down and opening up a news website. It's not like sitting down and turning on Netflix. We can't be as passive. We have to actually dive in and be much more active readers and be more patient with ourselves. And sometimes that's just enough to keep people away. It's confusing. I hear that a lot from students as well. I just don't get what this poem was about. I don't understand what was going on, so I didn't like it. And sometimes it's just too abstract, which connects to the confusing part, right? We're so used to reading for information, for knowledge. What was this story about? What was this story trying to convey? Sometimes it's very hard to do that with poetry, to come out with a very satisfying, I can sink my teeth into this. This is what it was about. This is the meaning. I have to kind of break that mentality. And also the layout. I hear this from students as well. Poetry looks weird on the page. It's not written like an article. It's not written like a story. Sometimes lines are scattered all over the page. There are page breaks. It just looks weird. And then the terms. There are a lot of terms that we have to know, or sometimes are taught early on, that just feel like it's a second language we have to become fluent in before we can even discuss poetry in an effective way. So here's some of that poetry language. This poor woman sees it, and you might feel the same, right? Narrative, poem, diction, stanza, meter, symbolism, rhyme, metaphor, the list goes on and on. There's so many different terms. And today I don't want to go through each one, but what I would like to do is to just pluck out what I feel are the most useful ones that will help you guys no matter what poem you choose to tackle next couple of weeks. So Poetry Language 101 here. The first one I picked out was tone. I think this is one of the easier ones to understand because you understand this from listening to music. You understand this sometimes from reading the stories, from even watching TV shows. So think of tone as the way somebody says or writes something as an indicator what the person is feeling or thinking. There's a certain mood with each poem you encounter. Just like there's a certain tone, there's a certain mood when it comes to listening to music. What is that tone? Is it dark and gloomy? Is it hopeful? Is it excited? What is the overall feel? If you were to just kind of back up for a minute and define in your own words, how do I feel after that? How do I feel after reading that poem? What's the tone? Just like think about it like listening to a song. I bet if you're in a certain mood, you gravitate towards different songs. Same deal with poetry. Different tones will create different moods. Diction. This is just a fancy way of saying the word choice, the use of words and phrases in the writing. Poets are very deliberate with the words they're choosing. You can see it's much shorter on the page than a story or a novel. And good poets, nothing is by mistake. So what's the word choice? Why that word and not another? What's the significance of that word? And then you can even back up and ask, well, how does that word make me feel? How does that contribute to the overall tone? Sometimes you can just circle words in poetry. I think that's a good idea as you're going through, if you're old school and like to print out poems, to just circle words that stand out and just make you feel a certain way, or just feel like this is important. I need to catch this word. It's doing something for me. It makes me feel a certain way. And then stanza. I also pulled that one out just so everyone's on the same page. This is just the division of four or more lines, having a fixed length, the meter, rhyming scheme. Think of it as a chunk of words on the page. They're often broken up by white space. Stanzas, I guess, are similar in poetry, or similar to paragraphs in prose. That's just so we all are on the same page. If you're reading a poem that has stanzas, that's just the division of four or more lines. Nothing crazy there. Here's another good one, theme. What is the main idea, underlying meaning of a literary work? As you read that poem, what are some themes that would come up? You could also let's back up for a minute and think about some of those shows you're watching on Netflix, like I talked about. You can also say, what is the theme of this show? That might be an easier way to come into this idea. I bet if you have a certain show, you could now turn to a friend and say, oh, I've watched, 5 episodes of this show, and it seems like this theme keeps coming up. Greed, love, the list goes on and on. But this is kind of that running big main idea that just kind of moves like a current through the whole literary work or artistic work. It could be a show, could be a movie, but it also can be a poem. So what is a theme that comes up? That big main idea that you feel the poet is trying to convey. And then the last one, symbolism. It's the act of using an object or word to represent an abstract idea. So sometimes when we read, the one that I think of most commonly is the ocean, right? The ocean isn't just an ocean, or maybe a road, right? The road maybe symbolizes adventure, maybe the unknown, right? What does that forest symbolize? So sometimes in poetry, the literal thing, the ocean, the forest, the road, that mountain, isn't just a mountain, right? Maybe that mountain symbolizes hardship or challenges. So start thinking that way when you read poetry. Sometimes the literal meanings of a word or object aren't just that's it, it's just fixed and static. You might have to zoom out and think about the symbolism. What is the poet trying to symbolize with that object? And the last slide that I wanted to say, well, where's the love, right? How do we get to look like this little boy here with a big smile and put some pleasure back into poetry? Well, one is approach it with a different mentality. Don't go into it like you're trying to read a news source. Don't go into it, like you're trying to watch a show on Netflix. But instead, I would start to think of it more like you're listening to music. What is the mood of that song? What is the mood of that poem? Don't just think of it as I'm trying to figure out what this is about. I want the answers. I want content knowledge after reading this, after consuming it. Instead, I would start to think more about how you feel. I think that's a good place to start with poetry. Not so much what was this about, but instead, how did it make me feel? And that's a good starting point to kind of rappel down from there. Well, how did I get to this feeling? Just like if you were to listen to a song, why is this song making me feel this way? What is it about the lyrics, about the instruments, about the way that the singer is singing that makes me feel this way? Same deal with poetry. What is it about the language? What is it about the themes that come up that make me feel this way when I read that poem? The second piece of advice, find your poetry space. We talked about it's more demanding than, just sitting down and passively going through your feeds on social media or watching a show or movie. You do have to kind of step up and recognize that it requires more from you. I had a student a while back, and she used to tell me, this is when I lived in Chicago, her favorite poetry space was on the L train. And she just liked going in the back, finding a spot by herself, and she liked the feeling of the train moving. And for some reason, that just worked for her. She was able to get into poetry a lot more in the back of those trains as they were moving. Where's your poetry space? Probably not in front of the TV while it's blaring. If you have kids, probably not while they're jumping all over you. But sometimes too, if you can find poems that are online too, and you can listen to them, I always like doing that too. There's a lot of resources out there where you can actually hear the poem being read out loud to you, and put some headphones on and kind of absorb it that way, not just reading it on the text. Just like I listen to music, sometimes I listen to poetry, but I'm also a huge nerd. So, there you go. And then part 3, open up and slow down. Remember, it's confusing, it's abstract. So maybe it's so weird at first and you don't really understand what's going on. Don't run away from it for that reason. Go into it with an open mind, just like you would go up to a song with an open mind and you slow down. Maybe that first time you listen to a song, you have no clue what the singer-songwriter is trying to say. It just feels like a very weird song, but there's something captivating about it. There's something that draws you into that song. And then maybe the 4th or the 5th time, or maybe 5 years down the road, you listen to that song again, depending on what's happening in your life. And man, you just feel a heart connection to it. Same deal with poetry. Again, it's about the feeling. It's about slowing down and not just trying to consume very quickly and find, this is the answer. This is what it's about. Now I can just write what it was about and I'm good. Think a bit slower. Go into it. Maybe read it a few more times. Maybe come back to it after a while. And don't just run away after that first reading if things feel weird. So there, is just a quick, hopefully, guide of how to make poetry work for you a little bit more and take some of the poetry blues out of it and some of the fear out of it. But yeah, go into those poems kind of like you're listening to music. And, if this helps, definitely rewatch this video and check out those terms. But I look forward to what you come up with as you read your poems and how they make you feel. Good luck, everybody.